He stood at the gate every morning in a faded green uniform and a worn cap pulled low over his eyes. Executives walked past him like he was part of the fence. Some threw instructions at him without stopping. Some drove through without a single glance, windows up, music playing, the smell of their cologne fading long before they remembered he existed. They saw the uniform. They saw the cap. They saw a gate man and they stopped looking. But what if the man standing at that gate owned the building behind it? Why would someone with that kind of power choose to stand in the sun wearing a security uniform? What was he looking for that a boardroom could not show him? And when the truth finally walked into that meeting room and sat down at the head of the table, what happened to the people who had treated him like he was nothing? Sit back and find out as we dive into this story. Jude did not look like a man who owned things. That was something he had worked at deliberately over many years in many rooms. He had learned early that the most powerful position you can occupy in any situation is the one nobody is watching. Let people perform for the cameras. Let them dress for the audience. He preferred to sit quietly in the corner and understand everything before anyone understood him. He was 32 years old. He had built his wealth without inheriting a single naira of it, through real estate investments in Abuja and Port Harcourt, a logistics company that operated across 6 states, and a sharp instinct for acquiring undervalued assets before the market caught up. He worked in silence. He celebrated in private. And when his lawyers completed the paperwork that made him the new majority shareholder of Meridian Group, one of Abuja's most established corporate firms, he did not tell anyone outside his inner circle. Instead, he stood in his bedroom that Sunday evening and looked at 2 things hanging side by side. On the left, a navy blue tailored suit, pressed and ready, the kind he wore when he needed the room to know immediately who it was dealing with. On the right, a green security uniform, slightly faded at the collar, borrowed from a contact who ran a private security company. The cap that came with it smelled faintly of another man's long days. He reached for the uniform. He was not performing poverty. He was not pretending to be something he was not. He was choosing to see something true, and truth, in his experience, only revealed itself when it did not know it was being observed. On Monday morning, Jude arrived at the Meridian Group headquarters at 6:45. The security captain, who had been told only that a new contract officer was joining the team, handed him his post assignment without looking up from his clipboard. Gate duty. Main entrance. Morning shift. Jude nodded, pulled the cap low over his eyes and took his position. The first car arrived at 7. The driver did not acknowledge him. Neither did the second. Or the third. Jude stood straight and watched them all walk in. His building. His gate. His people, and not one of them knew it yet. Within 3 days, Jude understood the social architecture of Meridian Group completely. It was not complicated. Buildings like this one had a grammar, a set of unspoken rules about who mattered and how much, and once you knew how to read it, every interaction confirmed the same thing. Title was everything here. Floor level was everything. The car you drove determined how long the gate took to open. Emeka arrived every morning at 7:55 in a black Toyota Land Cruiser with tinted windows. He was the head of corporate strategy, mid-50s, broad-shouldered, with the particular confidence of a man who had never been seriously questioned in a professional setting. He spoke loudly on his phone as he walked through the gate, one hand in his pocket, the other holding the device as though it were a scepter. He never acknowledged the gate staff. Not a nod. Not a glance. The gate simply opened and he walked through, as though the mechanism were the natural response of a world that existed to make his movement easier. Cynthia arrived at 8:15, always in a different car, always impeccably dressed. She was the head of business development, early 40s, precise in every movement, with an intelligence in her eyes that Jude recognized immediately and noted with care. She was the more dangerous one. She smiled at people she needed and looked past people she did not. Jude had seen her warmth. It was real, genuinely warm, but it had an architecture to it. It was distributed according to a logic that had nothing to do with character and everything to do with usefulness. She had walked past Jude 4 times in 3 days without a single glance. Daniel and Ada, 2 quieter board members who arrived together most mornings, were guilty of the gentler variety of contempt. They were not cruel. They were simply absent. The gate staff existed at the periphery of their vision and stayed there, consistently, without malice and without interest. Jude watched all of them with the attention of a man who was not watching, which is the only kind of attention that ever reveals anything true. He stood straight. He opened the gate. He nodded at the cars. And inside, behind the calm of the green uniform and the faded cap, he took careful inventory of everything he saw. The company was profitable on paper. He had known that from the acquisition documents. What the documents had not told him was this. The people running it had confused authority with character for so long that they no longer knew the difference. He was beginning to understand exactly what needed to change. It started on a Thursday morning, 11 days into his post. A delivery truck arrived at 7:20, earlier than expected, carrying supplies for the building's facilities department. Jude followed protocol, checked the paperwork, and called through to the facilities officer to confirm the delivery before opening the gate. The call took 4 minutes. Standard procedure. Emeka's Land Cruiser arrived during those 4 minutes. The driver honked once. Then again. Then Emeka himself stepped out of the back seat, and the temperature at the gate changed immediately. How long does it take to open a gate? Emeka's voice was not raised in the way of a man losing control. It was raised in the way of a man who had never needed to, the particular volume of someone who had learned that volume alone was enough to end most situations. Do you know how many times I have been delayed by gate staff who cannot do a simple job? Jude turned from the delivery truck calmly. I'm sorry for the wait, sir. I was confirming a delivery. I'll have you through in 1 minute. Emeka looked at him the way people look at objects that have disappointed them. 1 minute, he repeated, as though the words themselves were evidence of a broader failure. He got back into the car. The driver looked ahead. The delivery officer standing beside Jude looked at the ground. Jude opened the gate and said nothing. 2 days later, Cynthia stopped at the gate on her way out and looked at him directly for the first time. My dry cleaning is being delivered this afternoon, she said. Sign for it and keep it at the gate. I'll collect it on my way back. Jude looked at her. I can let the reception desk know, Ma. They handle personal deliveries. She tilted her head slightly. I'm asking you. She walked to her car and left. Jude signed for the dry cleaning at 3:15. He stood with it at the gate until she returned at 5:40 and took it without a word of acknowledgement. That same week, 2 junior executives stood in the car park near his post during their lunch break, talking loudly enough for him to hear every word. One of them glanced at his uniform and said something to the other that made them both laugh. Jude did not look up. He kept his eyes on the road and his hands at his sides. He was not angry. He had not come here to feel. He had come here to know. And now he knew. Her name was Amara. She worked in the mailroom on the ground floor, a small, windowless room at the back of the building that received more traffic than almost any other space in the company and received almost no recognition for it. She had worked there for 3 years. She knew every name on every floor. She knew which executives opened their own mail and which ones had assistants who threw half of it away. She knew the building the way only people who serve it invisibly ever truly do. Jude had seen her pass the gate several times, always moving with purpose, always carrying something, always with the quiet self-possession of someone who had decided a long time ago that their dignity was not contingent on whether other people acknowledged it. On a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week, she appeared at the gate at 7:15 carrying 2 paper cups of tea from the canteen down the road. She held one out to him. Cold morning, she said simply. I always get 2. My friend didn't come in today. Jude looked at the cup for a moment, then took it. Thank you, he said. She stood beside him for a few minutes looking out at the road. She did not ask what school he went to. She did not ask how long he had been in security work or whether he had ambitions beyond the gate. She simply stood there in the early morning quiet and drank her tea, and allowed him to drink his, and the simplicity of it was something Jude felt in a way that surprised him. What's your name? She asked before she left. Jude, he said. She nodded. I'm Amara. I'm in the mailroom if you ever need anything sorted. She picked up her bag and walked back through the gate. Jude watched her go. He had stood at that gate for 3 weeks. Hundreds of people had passed through it. She was the first person who had asked his name. He finished his tea slowly, watching the morning traffic build on the road outside. The coldness of the air had not changed. The building behind him had not changed. But something in the way he was carrying the day shifted slightly, not softened exactly but widened. Reminded that the problem was not the building itself. The problem was specific. It lived in specific people. And it was not, as this morning had just confirmed, universal. He set the empty cup down carefully and straightened his cap. There was still work to do. In his 4th week, the security captain reassigned Jude to an interior post. The regular officer who covered the building's internal corridor rotation had taken ill, and Jude was moved inside to cover the gap. It was a temporary assignment, 3 days at most, but it took him through every floor of the building, through the corridors and conference rooms and open-plan offices that the gate had never shown him. He moved through the building the way furniture moves, present, functional, unremarkable. And because no one remarkable moved that way, No one looked at him carefully enough to see what he was actually doing. He was listening. On the second floor, he stood outside a glass-walled meeting room during a budget planning session and watched Emeka at the head of the table. A young analyst, sharp-faced, clearly well-prepared, walked the team through a restructuring proposal she had clearly spent significant time building. Jude watched her present. Then he watched Emeka interrupt her mid-sentence, rephrase her core argument in his own words, and present it back to the room as a thought he had been developing. The analyst looked at the table. Nobody said anything. On the fourth floor, he stood at the end of a corridor while a department manager berated a junior staff member in a voice low enough not to carry to other offices but sharp enough to leave a mark. The junior staff member stood with her arms at her sides and her eyes focused on the middle distance, the body language of someone who had learned how to be in two places at once. In the executive lounge, he collected a tray from a catering staff member and carried it into a meeting where Cynthia was hosting a client. He set the tray down. She continued her conversation without pausing. The client thanked him. Cynthia did not. By the end of the third day inside the building, Jude had completed the picture. The gate had shown him the culture from the outside. The interior had shown him how deep it ran. This was not a company with isolated problems. It was a company with a character, one that had been shaped over years by the people at the top and absorbed downward through every floor, every team, every silent room where someone had decided it was safer not to speak. He returned to the gate on Thursday morning with everything he needed. The board meeting was in 11 days. The email went out on a Wednesday afternoon. Jude had composed it himself, 3 weeks earlier, and scheduled its delivery through his legal team's external server so that it carried no traceable connection to any name already known inside the building. It was brief, formal, and precise. The new majority shareholder of Meridian Group would be present at the board meeting scheduled for the following Friday. He would be formally introduced at that session. All board members and senior executives were expected to attend. The building changed within hours. Jude watched it from the gate with the particular quiet interest of a man watching something he set in motion. Cars slowed slightly as they came through, drivers less hurried, executives stepping out with a different quality of alertness. By Thursday morning he could see it in the way people walked. Back straighter. Phones pocketed faster. The low-level performance anxiety of a building that had been told it was about to be seen. Emeka called a preparatory meeting of the senior leadership team that afternoon. Jude learned this from Amara, who passed the gate at lunchtime and mentioned it the way she mentioned most things, plainly, without drama, as simple information. "There's a big meeting upstairs," she said. "Everyone's polishing their shoes." Jude smiled at that. He could imagine the room. Emeka at the head of it, coaching the team on the impression they needed to make. Cynthia reviewing her portfolio, highlighting the numbers that reflected well and deciding how to contextualize the ones that did not. Daniel and Ada preparing the kind of measured, careful professionalism that senior people perform when they know they are being evaluated. They were preparing for a man they had never met. They were preparing to impress someone they had already looked through dozens of times without recognizing. Jude stood at the gate as the afternoon faded into evening and watched the last of the executives leave the building. Their cars moved through one by one, smooth and unhurried, the building releasing them back into Abuja's evening traffic. He closed the gate at the end of his shift and walked to his own car, parked 2 streets away as always. 1 week. He arrived at 6:45, the same as every other morning. The air was cool and still in the way Abuja mornings sometimes are before the city remembers itself. That brief window between the quiet of night and the noise of the day when the light is soft and everything looks slightly more honest than it will an hour later. Jude stood at his post and breathed it in slowly. He opened the gate for the facilities truck at 7. He signed for a document delivery at 7:30. He directed a visitor to the reception entrance at 8:10. All of it exactly as usual. All of it exactly as it had been every morning for 5 weeks. Emeka arrived at 7:55. The Land Cruiser rolled through without stopping. No acknowledgement. Same as always. Cynthia walked through at 8:15. She was on the phone. She passed within 2 meters of Jude without a glance. Same as always. At 8:40, Amara appeared at the gate with a paper cup of tea. "Big day upstairs," she said, handing it to him with a small smile. "The whole building is nervous." "Is that so?" Jude said. She laughed lightly. "I hope whoever this shareholder is, he's decent. This place could use some decent at the top." She paused. "Have a good day, Jude." "You too, Amara." She walked back through the gate. He watched her go. He drank the tea slowly, looking out at the road one final time through the eyes of the man everyone thought he was. The man in the green uniform with the worn cap and the quiet that people had mistaken for emptiness. He had stood here every morning for 5 weeks. He had been invisible in the most complete way a person can be invisible, not hidden but simply not seen. And in that invisibility he had learned more about this company than any financial audit or management report had ever told him. At midday he told the security captain he had an appointment inside the building. He walked through the main entrance. He took the elevator. He pressed the button for the top floor and watched the numbers rise in silence. The elevator opened. He walked to the boardroom door. He straightened his collar. He did not remove the cap. Not yet. He pushed the door open and walked in. The room was exactly as he had imagined it. 12 people around a long mahogany table. Presentation slides loaded on the screen at the far end. A graph showing quarterly performance, upward trending, designed to make the best possible first impression. Water glasses filled. Folders open. Every person in that room wearing the careful, composed expression of someone who had rehearsed it since Wednesday. Emeka was at the right side of the table, 2 seats from the head, in the position of a man fully prepared to be recognized. Cynthia sat across from him, her portfolio open, a pen held with relaxed precision. Daniel and Ada were further down, upright and attentive. The legal representative from the firm managing the transition sat at the far end with a closed laptop and an expression of someone who already knew exactly what was about to happen. The room turned when the door opened. For a full second nobody spoke. Then someone near the back of the table whispered something, not loudly enough for the words to carry, but the tone was unmistakable. A ripple of confused, uncomfortable laughter moved through the room the way it had moved through other rooms before this one, the specific laughter of people who are nervous and have chosen the wrong response. Emeka stood up. "Excuse me." His voice carried the particular authority of a man who had never needed to raise it to be obeyed. "This meeting is for board members and senior leadership only. Security staff are not." Jude walked past him. He walked to the head of the table. He pulled out the chair. He sat down. He placed both hands flat on the table in front of him, looked around the room with the unhurried attention of a man who had been waiting patiently for this moment for 5 weeks, and removed the cap. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from any that had existed in that room before. It was not the silence of people waiting for something. It was the silence of people who had just understood something that was restructuring itself rapidly inside each of them, revising every assumption they had made, replacing it with a version of events that was both obvious in retrospect and completely devastating in the present. Emeka sat down slowly. He did not seem to know he was doing it. Cynthia's pen was still in her hand. She set it down without looking at it. Jude looked around the room. He took his time. He let the silence do the work that silence is designed to do. Then he spoke. "My name is Jude," he said. "I am the new majority shareholder of Meridian Group. I completed the acquisition 6 weeks ago." He paused. "I have been working at the front gate for the last 5 weeks. Nobody moved. I came here the way I came here because I needed to understand what this company actually is, not what it looks like in a presentation but what it is when nobody important is watching." His voice was even and unhurried. "And I want to tell you what I found." He told them. Not everything. Not every name, every incident, every moment catalogued over 5 weeks of standing in the sun in a green uniform. But enough. He told them about the gate delays and the berating. About the dry cleaning and the errand running. About the meeting room where a young analyst's work was taken and presented without acknowledgement. About the junior staff member on the 4th floor who had learned to be in 2 places at once just to survive her working day. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The room was already carrying everything he was saying at a volume that had nothing to do with sound. "I will not be removing everyone in this room," Jude said. "That is not why I am here. I am here because I believe this company has the foundation to become something genuinely excellent. But that will not happen with the culture that currently exists in this building. And that culture starts at the top." He looked at Emeka. Then at Cynthia. Then around the full table. "That culture ends here." He stood up. "My team will be in contact with each of you individually over the next week. The restructuring begins on Monday." He picked up the cap. He held it in his hand for a moment, this worn, faded thing that had made him invisible to every person in this room for 5 weeks. Then he set it on the table in the middle of all of them and walked out. The restructuring took 4 weeks. Emeka was reassigned to a newly created advisory role. No team beneath him, no authority over junior staff, no platform from which to perform the kind of power he had confused with leadership. The role was not a punishment designed for humiliation. It was a precise removal of the conditions that had allowed his worst qualities to operate unchecked. What he did with the remaining space was now his own responsibility. Cynthia was placed on a formal performance review with clearly defined cultural expectations attached to her evaluation for the first time in her tenure. She was not removed. She was given the clearest possible signal that the rules of the game had changed, and that her intelligence, which was genuine and considerable, would now need to operate within a different set of values if it was going to thrive here. Daniel and Ada received the same document that went to every employee in the building. A new charter of professional conduct, signed by Jude, that said in plain language what Meridian Group expected of its people at every level. It was not a legal document. It was a statement of character. The kind of document that only means something if the person at the top means it. Amara was promoted. Jude did it personally, calling her into his office on the second week. He told her that he had observed her, that he had noted the quality of her character over 5 weeks of standing at a gate, and that the company needed people like her in positions where that character could shape the people around it. He gave her a new role in operations with a team of 6 and a mandate to build the kind of internal culture the mailroom had apparently been operating quietly for years. She looked at him for a long moment before she responded. "You were the gate man," she said. It was not a question. "I was," he said. She was quiet for another moment. Then, "I thought you seemed like someone who was somewhere else at the same time." He smiled at that. On the last Friday of the 4th week, Jude addressed the full company staff in the building's atrium. He did not stand on the raised platform at the front of the room. He stood on the floor, in the middle of them, the cleaners and the analysts and the executives and the catering staff, and he spoke without notes for 11 minutes about what he believed a company could be when it decided that the measure of its culture was not how it treated its most powerful people, but how it treated its most invisible ones. When it was over, he walked through the building to the front entrance. He pushed open the door and stepped outside. The Abuja morning was warm and moving, traffic building on the road, the sky a clear and definite blue. He walked to the front gate and stood at it for a moment, looking back at the building. 5 weeks ago he had stood here in a green uniform and nobody had seen him. Today the building knew his name. He straightened his jacket. Then he walked to his car and drove into the city, already thinking about what came next. Jude could have walked into that building on the first day in a tailored suit and made everyone stand up straight immediately. He had every right to. The acquisition was complete. The paperwork was signed. The building was already his before he ever put on that uniform. But he chose to wait. He chose to watch. He chose to understand before he acted. And that choice, more than the wealth, more than the acquisition, more than the boardroom moment that nobody in that room will ever forget, is the real lesson this story carries. We live in a world that has taught us to judge quickly. We look at a uniform and we think we know the story. We look at a job title, a car, a floor level, and we decide what a person is worth before they have spoken a single word. We do it without thinking. We do it because the world trained us to, and we never stop to question whether the training was right. But here is what Jude's story quietly insists. The most important thing about a person has never been what they are wearing. Emeka had the car. He had the title. He had the floor and the seat and the voice that filled every room he entered. And none of it told the truth about his character. It only told the truth about his position, which is a very different thing and a far less important one. Amara had a small room on the ground floor with no windows and a job that most people in that building could not have named if you asked them. And she had more genuine leadership in the simple act of carrying 2 cups of tea on a cold morning than some people accumulate in an entire career of occupying powerful chairs. Character is not assigned by title. Respect is not earned by rank. Kindness is not a resource to be rationed based on what a person can do for you. These are not complicated ideas. We know them when we hear them. The difficulty is not in understanding them, it is in living them on an ordinary Tuesday morning when no one important appears to be watching. But here is what Jude's 5 weeks at that gate revealed with absolute clarity. Someone is always watching. Not always the person you expect. Not always from the direction you are facing. But the way you treat the person at the gate, the person who cannot promote you, cannot fire you, cannot do anything visible for your career, that is the truest measure of who you are. It is easy to be kind to people who matter. The real test of character is how you treat the people you have decided do not. Jude passed that test every single day in a green uniform and a worn cap with a patience that most people would have exhausted long before the board meeting arrived. And the people who failed it were not destroyed. They were given something rarer and more valuable than punishment. They were given the chance to change. That is the final lesson and perhaps the most important one. The goal of justice is not to ruin the people who got it wrong. The goal is to build the conditions where getting it right becomes possible. So the next time you walk past someone at a gate or in a uniform or carrying something heavy through a back entrance, pause for one moment. Ask yourself not what that person can do for you, but what kind of person you want to be in this particular moment, when nothing is at stake and no one important appears to be watching. Because you never truly know who is standing at the gate. And more importantly, the person watching most carefully in that moment is always you. If this story moved you, drop your thoughts in the comment section below. I would love to read from you. There is another powerful story coming your way very soon. Subscribe and turn on your notification bell so you will be the first to know when it drops. If this story spoke to you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.